interactive prison, Shrewsbury Prison, England. So let's go inside the prison, and I'm going first time in the prison without any crime. But in reality, I never been in prison for any reason. Okay. So information brochure, the prison activity booklet. So it's mentioned there: level 1 prison van, garret lodge, reception, segregation, strip cell. What I will discuss with you.
Yes, you were.
The way it was used to use this prison under the Prison Act 1952. It is a criminal offence for any person to help prisoner to escape, attempt to escape, maximum penalty 10 years. So left hand side is all visitor and prisoner need to be aware inappropriate physical interaction is prohibited. So this is the room, office room, they can watch. Security room is called, and it's mentioned what allowed, what don't allow. And inside is the CCTV everywhere, so they can monitor from here. Before, obviously, they were used to use the big things, but now it's apps and everywhere. So it's cells start from hand sanitizing if you are going to go there. These are the meeting rooms, prisoner, visitor and prisoner. If prisoner show right behavior in prison, so they allow them. So backyard of the prison. Our guide today, Mr. Jack, prison manager.
Prison, previously called HMP Shrewsbury, and they closed 7 of these prisons down 10 years ago, these smaller, older establishments, okay? And then the government started to decide that these really big prisons are much better to have than the small ones. They're bigger than Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds and the London prisons. Wrexham Prison being the first one they built in about 6 years ago, designed for 2,106 prisoners. So it makes it the largest prison in Europe at the moment. There's another one going up in Wellingborough. They've built that now. That's 1,800 to 2,000. And there's another one in Leicester that's going to be 1,800 to 2,000. The trouble with big prisons is they're much more difficult to manage because there's a much bigger movement with prisoners within the system all the time and a bigger movement of staff within the prisons all the time. And it's really hard to embed a solid working regime. I've worked in big and small prisons, folks. When you come to a smaller prison like this, you get to know everybody. They get to know me. So I know you. I know it. And I've known some of these men longer than I've known my own children. And the reality with that is, folks, you get to know who the troublemakers are. When you know who they are in the small jail, they're easier to lean on a little bit more to keep their heads down. The ones that can't cope, go to prisons that are going to struggle with their prison sentence, and we're going to be there, and you're going to have to help them along the way. The bulk of prisoners mostly come to jail, want to do bird, go home with as least amount of problems they can get away with. The trouble is you're in a prison. And that's a closed environment. So it's not so easy just to wander away from things and not get involved. There'll be maybe a lot of pressure, particularly in your big jails, where you've got a much higher level of diversity going on in the place, where there may be a lot of instances of being pulled back and forth, whether they want to be there or not. So you can see the problem with that, guys. I've worked on big prisons and worked on 3 or 4 or 5 wings sometimes in the same day. You're never there long enough to manage anything. You're just not, and that's the job. What's my job? Manage men. Some are difficult, some are struggling, and mostly you can all just pop along and get on one way or the other, stuff like that. So yeah, I started off in the bourse. Oh, sorry, to introduce myself. Graham's my name, folks. You've probably guessed that I'm a prison officer already. 38 years I served as an officer. Started off what was then called the Borstal system, way back in the 70s. They changed it to the young offenders in the early 80s. Not the best move they ever made. And then I went to Gartree Prison, which was a high security prison. All those people that you've heard of, folks, I bumped into. What we're going to do today is we're going to walk around, we're going to go into reception, we're going to talk about some of the procedures they go through, some of the difficulties that some prisoners are bringing with them. You have to remember that prisoners have problems out there, they bring them to prison with them, they don't go away. They still exist and they've got to be managed, by them preferably, but you can have the difficult problems with stuff like that. We'll go from there on to the main wing. It's a Victorian prison, folks. I'm going to give you the Victorian history, bring you up to date with the way that prisons are operating today. and then we'll go up to the landings and tell you some more stories, okay? You will have a chance to walk around when we're there to take pictures, get in your cells, lock up your partners, leave us with a tenner, keep for a week or two, hey, have a break. But we'll deal with all that as we get there. I'll take you out the back, talk about work and education for prisoners, go to another small wing with its own history, and finally end up in that middle-sized building you see there, because that was the latest version of the execution room that was used at Shrewsbury when the death penalty was still in existence, okay? And even though it's old and many people have heard and known about the death penalty, I'm absolutely guaranteed that I will tell you things that you thought, I didn't know that, I didn't know that, I didn't know that. So you will find it pretty interesting, I think, to find you. But okay, guys, so ask any questions you like. About 350 prisoners on average, although it was built for 178. Victorians only ever built their cells to be single accommodation everywhere. So Manchester, Liverpool and Leeds, they're all doubling up their numbers today. Okay, that's the way it is. It's become normalised to have two rather than one. There are single cell accommodations around, but mostly twos and stuff like that. Yeah, so single cells, silent regimes are run, but I'll talk more about that when we get on to the wing, okay? When I got to this prison, folks, because it was built for 178, there were 450 prisoners in here, and it was rising. Because during the late 80s to the early 90s, there was a huge pressure on people being locked up in police cells. They started complaining because they said, we need the space so we can, it's a custody suite, it's not a prison, couldn't give them the facilities. So they forced them back onto us, said, you're taking them one way or the other. So we ended up putting 3 prisoners in these cells when I got here. Some prisons ended up with 4 in the cell. They just, particularly big cities, pushing them in, pushing them in. I'll talk about the conditions they were living under when we get on there, folks. But I can tell you, when I step through these doors, I become a Victorian officer. Victorian we were operating at that time, okay? So we'll deal with that a little bit later. Documents. The very first one we check before they get off is called the warrant. We have to have a warrant from a court before we can lock a prisoner up. That's our only legal authority to do so. Transfers are different because we've already got the warrant. See what I mean? So they're coming off and I might be stood there looking, it's okay, send the next one off, and I'll be looking like that and I'll look up and go, we know each other, don't we? Oh, boss, how are you getting on? I've seen you for a while. How long ago was that? Oh, about 3 months ago. And there are prisoners, folks, many, many prisoners that will never serve much longer than 7, 8, 9 months and less, paying off fines 2 weeks here, 5 weeks there, 6 months here and all that. And they can do it for 20 odd years, folks. Like I said, I've known some of these men from young offenders up into their 40s, in and out. Officially, official figures from just before COVID, 46% of prisoners that get sentenced to prison don't get longer than 6 months. They don't even get longer than 6 months. So what do you do with somebody, and it's an honest question to ask, not having a debate here of course, but what do you do with somebody when you've only got them for 6 months or less? Serving fines for a couple of weeks, serving 3 or 4 months. It can take you months to get a prisoner out of your jail into their training prisons to go on the appropriate courses, because they don't keep them here, we've got to get them out to take the next lot in. And I'd say to the prisoner, I've got that course for you, got that course for you. And they go, oh, I've got tagging boss, which means electronic tagging, which gets them out about 3 or 4 weeks earlier. Ain't got time now. So they're going in and out, folks. This is the bulk of prisoners, what they call the recidivism rate. This is the bulk of prisoners that keep coming around the system for 20 odd years, because they're never going out, they're never in long enough to learn anything, and they're getting out that quick. I'm not suggesting they should serve longer. I'm just saying, think about it, because prisons are extremely expensive places to run. And you've got to ask the question, what value do we get as a society out of that? What value does the prisoner get out of it? Because if they're learning nothing and doing nothing, folks, they're just going to keep going around in this circle all the time. But it is what it is at this moment. The thing we're going to look for in that warrant are going to be the offences, of course, because there are people coming in. It's not children here, no. They committed sex offences, adult on adult, adults and children. Particularly children, they're going into that little room just there. They're going to be separated from other prisoners, placed on what we call protective custody, as well ex-police officers and ex-prison officers, because it won't take long for prisoners to find out who you are. Are you on my guided tour, folks?
Yeah.
There's my volunteers for the execution room. See? There's always somebody. Except for the big lad, you're all right, mate. I know my limits. But no. So yeah, they're going to go in there, ex-police officers. Prisoners find out stuff very quickly. They've had radio since the late 1940s. They've had TV since the late 1990s. They've had telephones since the late 1990s. They're actually putting telephones in all the cells as I speak at this moment in time. They've also got visits a lot more often than they used to have. When I first joined the service, a convicted prisoner only got 1 visit per month, every 30 days it was. Then they brought it down to 14 where it sits today, but you've got what they call additional visits given for behaviour under what they call the IEP scheme, or the prisoners that behave get more. So they can get up to 2, if not sometimes 3 visits in a week sometimes. So the information's coming in now. Papers aren't censored anymore. They used to cut chunks out of a newspaper. That's not censored anymore. So they got this information. What's in the public domain, they get to see. And some of the folks have got these. I'm touching you too, mate. All right. Be kind, be kind. No, they've got these things smuggled into jails. They're not supposed to have them before. We all know, folks, you got one of these, you got the world at your feet with one of these. You really have. So they find out stuff extremely quickly. But so that's where they're coming in. Those will be in that room. They'd be the holding room that side for other prisoners that don't have to be separated from the others. And then the nurse is going to deal with them, folks. That's the first person they might see. That nurse now operates from about 2 o'clock in the afternoon up till 8 or 9, sometimes up to midnight. It depends on how long it takes to get the processes done. Okay. Victorians, they mostly only worried about contagious diseases because they didn't really have any means to deal with it anyway. You've got a disease, I'd separate him up, delouse you, shave your head off, never shave women's heads unless it was necessary for medical reasons. So pretty basic stuff, wasn't it? Today you've got a nurse to be in there. There's 3 principal things that they will be asking the questions, the most important of the 3, outside the general health. One of them will be drug addiction. And this will be about looking to put prisoners up onto the detox programs. Then they're going to talk about mental health issues with prisoners. That is higher today than it's ever been, that I can ever remember. And that's because they're coming in, and you've got a whole spectrum, ladies and gentlemen. Think about things like autistic spectrum, bipolar personality disorders, severe personality disorders, EBDs, emotional behaviour deficits, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia. You've got social stroke psychopaths coming through the door at different levels, of course. Most of those men will manage because they're going to get healthcare, and they're going to have the staff, and generally they'll have their little bits of bumpy bits, but they'll get out the other end. They may come back, they may not, we don't know. There's going to be a smaller element of those prisoners coming into our prisons that have the potential to be extremely dangerous. And they're going to be dangerous to prisoners as much as they've ever been to members of staff. I've had prisoners standing on landings talking to me, not too often thankfully, telling me about the voices in their heads, and to them it's real. They don't see me as an officer, they just see a person. They don't see a prisoner, they don't see a prison. They only see what they've painted onto their TV screens that they're looking at, and it's real to them, folks. Not all prisoners are coming through these doors diagnosed. Sometimes you find out when they're stood there right in front of you. And that's difficult for us to manage, folks. Why? Because I'm not a psychiatric nurse. This is not a psychiatric hospital. Across our whole
prisoner manager taking us to other wing. So this is the chair. They mentioned it's a body scanner chair before every prisoner first to be naked for the search, but now it doesn't require due to technological advancement. This is cell, you can see. All these are cells.
And then you'll see it much clearer. This is a classical Victorian wing. They all look the same. Being built from the 1840s up to the 1880s. This is one of the later ones. They all look practically the same. I've been in Manchester, Liverpool and Leeds. I've been to many prisons for different reasons, but they're all built to one style. And that was designed for single cell accommodation by the Victorians on a silent regime. No talking, you come out to work together, you went to church together, you went on exercise together. All these things were compulsory, of course, and you did it in silence. And silence would have been strictly enforced. It was part of your prison sentence. That's the way they operated. Then in the early 1900s, and it's difficult to know exactly when it changed to 2. We think it was mostly coming after the First World War, when we got massive debts to be paid back. Prison output was rising. Yeah, so you could see that it came up to 2, which it stayed traditionally for good. So they've always used these Victorian prisons for twice their original capacity. I got here, there were 3 prisoners in there. They had no toilets, they had no water, they had no power. I was a Victorian officer because I was giving them a potty. And that potty, 3 men, probably don't know each other, locked up at 5 o'clock at night, not out till 7:30 in the morning, barring a 15-minute slop out till about 6 o'clock. The toilet, folks, piddling and pooing in those pots is not going to leave you with a great smell. The next morning when they come out to slop out, they all went to the recesses that were there to slop their pots. That's going to push the smells up. And so there was always a permanent lingering smell in these prisons, folks. You just forgot it. You just got used to it, it became nothing. The only time you notice it is when you went on leave and had a fortnight's holiday, sat in the sunshine, sipping sangria or whatever, and you come back and go, oh yeah, forgot about that. You get used to it very quickly. But that's the way it was. That was the way it was. They used to slop out. They got a return trip to get a bowl of water so they could have a strip wash because they only had one shower per week. And they only had one shower a week till 1996. Over 100 years. We had 11 showers down that corridor for 450 prisoners. It took all week to give them their one legal minimum shower. That's so you can see. Bathhouse duties, they used to call it. That's the way it was. Then 1995 turned up, the government done a huge amount of reviews and said, things have got to change. Things have got to change. We've got to have some better basic standard of hygiene. And I agree, because what's good for them is good for me. So every burden did something slightly different. We put a toilet in those cells, came back down to 2 prisoners. That takes the pressure off them a little bit, takes the pressure off us a little bit. At the same time, they put a sink. So they got hot and cold water. Now they can wash their hands and wash their crockery and cutlery, something they struggled to do effectively before. And then they also put power in the cells. Now this all happened over about a 3 to 3.5 year span. Didn't happen straight away because it took us 3.5 years to do it. Because we kept the prison open and we emptied the 2 columns down the far corner, 1s to 4s, got the prisoners out, reduced the numbers, and then moved them in when we did it, moved some more in, and worked our way around the prison till we completed it. So there was a huge amount of noise and dust maybe for those 3 years, you know, with jackhammers and the noise going on. But that's the way it was. But it did improve, folks, putting the toilet in. It was much, much more hygienic. Not the best place to have it, but it's better than what they had. It's as simple as that, okay? When they put the power in is when they moved from battery-operated radios to electric radios. And they started off this big, and they soon become boom boxes. Very quickly, folks. Those boom boxes make an extra big noise than the little ones. You can imagine the extra noise with 100 of these things on the wing. CDs, music CDs, then and now, prisoners can have their own music CDs in their cells if they choose to. Sometimes they swap them around. They're not supposed to, folks, but it's one of those unmanageable things. Hey, they take a chance, they lose it, whatever. Look after the stuff, or it's gone. So they swap them around, so what? So that was the way that was. Then just after that, 1997, they introduced TVs into cells. Remember, I came out of the 1970s, so I'd been 20 years in this job, and most of us had been here a long time, and we said, you what? You're giving them a what? I'm giving them a TV? What's the world coming to? TVs? Whatever next. Let me tell you what comes next, folks, because TVs, whether we like it or not, ended up being a pacifier. Just like we put our children in front of TVs to keep them quiet so we can be busy doing something else, it works for prisoners. Well, we all watch television at some stage through the week. So in there, if they're locked up in the day because there's no work for them, for whatever reason, at night times, they're mostly preoccupied by the time by TVs. They might have radios, they might read books, but the TV helps to be that passive. So it wasn't the end of the world by what comes next. Now, TVs are not a right in prisons. They're a privilege that can be lost for bad behaviour.
Inmates coming through.
Oh, look out, look out. Walk in the mile. Look out. Walk in the mile. Hands on your head, sir. Who do you think you are? Come on. Hey. Hands on your head, not on your hips. But no. So you see the world has changed. So they started to give them an electric kettle about late 97, and so prisoners can make their own hot drinks behind the cell door. And it's not a problem. Most prisoners use these things sensibly, of course, but it doesn't take a big percentage of your population to decide, I can use that to hurt people. Boiling water will do a lot of damage. You mix it up with sugar until it's thick and gluey. In prison, they give it the nickname of being napalm for people that understand how napalm works. If you don't, have a look on the internet for it, because it's going to glue itself. Sugary stuff is going to stick into your face. By the time you get healthcare anywhere near you, these are going to be life-changing injuries, folks. Used on prisoners, used on staff. And then they brought something else out, was the smartest trick in the book. They started to give prisoners razors. They brought out razors with prisoners. We used to control shaving. To hurt somebody. Thank you very much. Who was the person that said you bring in knives and blades? Why bother? We just give them something. Take them blades out, melt them into toothbrush handles. They've got their own version of a slashing weapon. Putting 2 blades controlled together, called being tramline. That's going to be life-changing injuries, folks. Life-changing on staff and on prisoners as well. It's easy to make a ship in a prison. Ship's a prison term for making blades. Think about it. They get CDs, snap those up, sharpen them up, put a handle on them. They get ceramic plates, ceramic cups. Some get glass jars with jam and coffee in it. You've got, there's always one. just happens to be the same one all the time. Remember tins of tuna, tins of fruit they're allowed to buy. You know how sharp those lids are. It's soft metal, folks. Easy to fold up, easy to sharpen up. Put a handle on. People I've seen, every single one of them is waiting for an excuse to do me some damage. No one can live under that kind of pressure. You couldn't. But you've got a small element coming through these doors, 10% sometimes, who are violent people outside. For whatever reasons they become violent, I don't know. But that's how they manage out there, and they manage in here the same way. So these weapons become offensive weapons to them. They do. And what you find is many of the prisoners will carry these weapons now as a sense of safety and security. Self-preservation. Now it's just like knife crime, folks. Out there with knife crime, there are probably many people carrying a knife, not with the intent of harming somebody, but with the notion that if somebody has a go at me, I've got protection. You can see how these things work, same in prison. The problem you've got is the minute knives and blades are pulled out, you've got about 10 seconds, folks, before it goes wrong. And it can go wrong one way or the other. Doesn't matter whether you're the perpetrator or not, something's going to be a disaster literally within 10 seconds. And it's no different in prisons than it is outside. The damage is already going to be done one way or the other. So it is hugely difficult, and it's much more violent than it used to be. Now I know what you're going to say. You go, well, what are the staff doing on preventing this? Well, in the days that we kept prisoners locked up if they weren't working, and we kept them locked up at night time, except for a few coming out to go to education, we had control. And we had 8 staff on this wing to control it when they were mostly locked up. Brilliant. Then they said open all the doors. And there 400 prisoners were walking around here, but you've still got the same 8 staff. 2 staff on each landing to manage. You can't manage that, folks. I'll guarantee you that. And that's true of all prisons today that will operate with minimal, roughly the same ratios wherever you are, depending on the prison size and the size you've got. So there's no such thing as remission in prisons anymore. It hasn't existed for a very, very long time. Magistrates did come into add time to a prisoner sentence, where originally governors could take time off them based on what they call the remission system. And that's all changed many, many, many years ago. Probably over 20 years ago, to be honest with you. So you've got that. Then you've got the cell just there, folks. That's a constant watch cell. Some prisoners make serious attempts in their life. They're going to need to be watched every second of the day for as long as it takes. Officers do that with 12-hour shifts, or overtime. It might be 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. And remember, some prisoners with their problems, this can be a lifetime situation for them, where they're in and out of jail all the time, and you can sometimes guarantee when they come in, give them about a fortnight to 3 weeks, you'll deteriorate down and end up in there. And it happens, folks, and it's happening in a way like it never happened before. Long before they go in there, we've got a whole thing called suicide prevention and safer custody going on in prisons, and that means staff have got all these different things going on. Prisoners may be watched a couple of times a day to keep an eye on them. Sometimes it'll be 5 or 6 times a day. Sometimes they get up to 5 times every hour. That means you're looking at a prisoner on average every 12 minutes, day and night. And that can go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. You're hoping to get them down that way, but sometimes they escalate up to that way. And it's not easy because we haven't been given extra staff to manage all this. All these additional things we deal with the same amount of staff we had when I walked through these doors in 1988. So you can see the pressure, and you can see the difficulties, and you can see things slip through the rafters, things slip through the holes in the floor. So that's where we stand at this moment in time. Just to clear this up as well, it's not just officers and staff that work hard to keep prisoners on an even keel. Prisoners get involved in it as well. In a prison like this, they still run a thing called the listener scheme in prisons. And we had about 10 to 12 prisoners. They're volunteers. They do not get paid, and they're trained by the Samaritans. And they're there as listeners, not counsellors, so prisoners can talk to them to get it off their chest if they don't want to talk to me. Because they see a uniform, they might be anti-anti. We understand that. Whatever works. I can't speak for other jails, folks, but the listeners we had in this prison did an absolutely first-class job. Over the 25 years, the 20 odd years it was in, folks, they have probably helped thousands of prisoners to successfully get through their system without deteriorating to a point where we got a true disaster on our hand. So they get credit, public credit where it's due. Because a lot of people don't even know what the listener scheme is. It's been around now at least 2 decades. So let's give them the credit because they're doing the right thing. It's never ever what we quite think it is in prison, but there you go. Just behind it, our little segregation unit, folks. 1 to 4, punishment block, they call it, or the block. Commonly, prisoners go in there. I don't put them there. I report prisoners for breach.
These are segregation unit. That means and this heinous crime, those who are either aggressive nature or they did any kind of heinous crime, they are segregated from other. So all these rooms are segregated prison. So, and these are some of the, you can see this facility in the prison room: bed, TV. Now all of us is going upstairs, the upper part of the prison, second floor of prison. So on second floor, every floor you find officer box here. So as gentleman explained us, every prison, even this prison, it was more than 800 prisoners, but only 12 officers, and out of 12, 6 as the prison officer and remain the civilian, they coined. So prisoner got all the facility, pool, common sitting space, and this is healthcare system.
It goes down that side, this queue goes down
Healthcare.
that side. Detox
the
unit
prison.
in there. I'll speak about in a minute. Prisoners are going to go into there. We leave the gate open. Well-run prison. You can self-manage. Don't I? There's an officer floating around this area. There, the prison centre are there, and there'll be an officer on that around there keeping an eye on what's going on there. That's all. So really quite casual. Get it done. Prisoners take medication there. They don't take medication back to themselves. Not even paracetamol is given to a prisoner. But we know why, folks. You're taking them up on this land, it's some relatively powerful drugs. Sometimes you can see what might happen with this stuff. They might save it up for themselves, have one big hit, can't do it anymore. They might be giving it away, selling it, or they may be having it taken off them. We need to make sure they're taking the appropriate medication that the doctors prescribe. Virtually had no problems here. And when I say no problems, I'm talking about less than 1% of the time that you'd have a difficulty there. And those difficulties tend to be three common things. The doctors changed it, and they don't like the changes. The doctors stopped it because they don't need it anymore. They don't agree with that, or they haven't done a repeat prescription. And what you might get there is, oh, yeah, and it all comes at different levels. Oh, I can't have, and then, no, I can't. You have to go back to the doctor. And those prisoners will go away. They're not overly happy, but they'll go away and we'll move on. And that some prisoners will stay there a bit longer, and they'll push the boat out a little bit more desperate. Sometimes they can't get it, and the head might go and harm himself, harm somebody else. They don't really mean it. What they're doing is to try to apply pressure. Sometimes when you see children that keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing until you go, oh, for bloody hell, have it for God's sake, you're driving me nuts. They might be using that tactic, of course, and that's not going to work with the nurse. They're not going to be allowed to do anything without the doctor saying so. And so the prisoners go away, and they're a little bit less happy than they were before. Now, some of them don't, and it was quite rare, folks. I've got to be, I can't speak for the prisoners, quite rare here. They would root themselves on that floor like a 4-year-old in a sweet shop. I'm not going anywhere till I get, and you can't stop me, and I'm in top. And I've heard it occasionally, they use things like human rights. Folks, that's the most misquoted phrase in all of human history, ladies and gentlemen. But they're pushing that boat up. But the language might change towards the nurse. So that if they've tried all the nice guy things, and now they might step into the world of slightly looking a bit more intimidating and aggressive. Nurses are past masters of dealing with it now. It was a bit of a struggle for them when they first came to jails as NHS staff in 1990. You'll hear the tannoy systems and the healthcare, general alarm healthcare, available staff, and then you'll hear a sound. If you're in there, it's a good sound, because it sounds like this. Yeah? Fred Astaire, Fred Astaire. No. It's not, it's a cavalry coming, not Fred Astaire, because 2 officers there may not be able to be enough to manage that prisoner. Some of these men are now violent, harmful, and strong, and they can do a lot of damage in a very, very short space of time, folks. Even though they use this as a studio, that's heavy. Get your head smacked around one of those, you've got some problems. So you can see. And a lot of damage can be done very quickly. So you need the cavalry down, prisoner will be restrained, taken down the back stairs, open a gate, carry on. We literally carry on if nothing happened. Just a routine. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Detox unit, folks, that's changed over the last 20 years. They introduced detox. I believe it's still methadone or Subutex. They decide on that. And the staff there decide whether it's a short program, a long program. It's a matter for them to do. Must be ghosts in the place. So you can see they decide what that program's going to be. Now I've got to be honest, some prisoners do succeed and do well. They do well, and their heads get back into the real world, and you can see they can function okay. Some go outside, some don't. It fails for some. Sometimes prisons have got so many drugs in them, not Shrewsbury, that they can't resist it when they're in another jail. So it's very difficult for them to have that control measure. One of the big problems we found with many prisoners, they go out with the best of intention. Clean. That's it, G, Mr. G, not coming back now, doing real well. I'm sure you will. Good luck to you. And then they get outside, and that's when their problems start, folk. Because where do you think they're going? They're going back to the world they stepped in from. To the same people, the same friends, the same family, the same dealers. The dealers must be waiting there for them. Oh, welcome back. I'll put you back on the list, shall I? You can see if they think about these things. And that's a danger for prisoners, because how do you resist that when you're going back to the only place that you can go back to? Whether it's in your family and stuff like that. Really difficult, folks. Peer pressure and loyalty. Sometimes group loyalty, gang loyalty can be very powerful, even though it may be misguided. Younger you are, the easier you fall into peer pressure and being misguided. You make decisions and you know in the back of your head they're bad ones, but it's about loyalty, and that causes you. So they're going out there to get caught with that. Don't get me wrong, guys, a lot of people are now involved in drugs at a very young age, and they're getting accustomed to it by the time they're 15 or 16. They're getting caught up in the drugs. Now, and how do most people pay for drugs if you ain't a rock star? Dealing and stealing, folks. Dealing and stealing. So what they do is some people become drug addicts first and criminals second, because they've got to pay for their drugs. That's what's the problem with that. And I've seen them come back to these doors and they get out, they're trying to do their best, they get caught up and stuff. I go, you were only here 6 months ago, that. You know, boss. I go, no, I don't, but I can understand. I remember a prisoner distinctly telling me one day, he was really good, he'd done really well here. He got out, he said, last time I got out, boss, he said, I went out, jumped in the car, I was doing really well, and my mates come to pick me up. And as I got in the car, he said, welcome out of prison. Give me a little rap, because they are still using, of course.
It's a 5-story prison. It's checking all the doors. Routine check. Thanks. So we are going to see other section of the prison.
Work and education for prisoners. It takes many forms depending on the prison that you're in, folks. You've got high security prisons, you've got medium security prisons, training prisons, lifer prisons, local prisons. Local prisons work is not usually highly skilled, because local prisons are designed to hold prisoners in and they get convicted and move them on to the training prisons. So their work is going to be rather at the bottom level, okay? This railway track was put here, and it was a rail track maintenance course for prisoners, selected prisoners, between Network Rail and the prison service. There are 4 in the country now, not this one, and if they're successful at that, they've got a good chance of picking up a job. They get an interview, but that still means you've got to prove willing when you get the job. You've also got Timpsons, folks. Timpsons for decades now have encouraged prisoners to pick up those skills. Keys, now the Keys passport, apparently you can get your screens done on there for them, passport photographs and shoes. Oh, we should started off with shoes, didn't they? Forgot the only thing they really did. But you can go down there. We used to send our prisoners out on day release, so they got themselves trained up before they come out of prison, which means they can step straight into work. Straight into work. And that makes all the difference, folks. Many prisoners are coming out with no work to go to, and that can take months to get a job. As you know, it's hard enough to get a job today without a criminal record. So if they're languishing around for 2 to 3 to 4 months, it's quite easy for them perhaps to fall back into what they know or what their friends know, and back into that routine again. So it's really been very good. There's very good success rate. There are failures, but nothing like. There's an old saying, you don't do anything with anybody, folks. Don't expect anything to change, I suppose. You've also got 5 restaurants in the country attached to prisons. You can find them under the Clink charity if you go on to the internet, and basically they're training male and female prisoners to do restaurant quality kind of running. They'll all be working at different levels, whether it's business, whether it's chefing, whether it's waitressing, whatever, waitering, stuff like that. And they reckon it's been very successful. They're thinking of putting more in now, because they have that positive feedback from what's going on. We'd like to encourage more employers, but it's not an easy thing to do, folks. Why? Because employers go, well, why should I employ you? I got 20 people outside my door, they haven't broke the law. So you can see it can be a difficult situation to do stuff like that. As far as Shrewsbury's work goes inside prisons, of course, our workshops were sewing machine shops and assembly shops. Not a great deal of skill was done there, little bits, but not a lot, because we're going to be moving the prisoners on. We only keep 20% of a population, the other 80% have got to be somewhere else. So much more about getting them out of cells, giving them something to do. For some prisons, it's their only source of income, of course. They don't earn a great deal of money. You can use some private cash, you're limited. So for some, you have to buy your own vapes and your own liquids. You've got to pay for your own telephone calls. You've also got to pay for decent tea, coffee, sugar, but you name it. You want those reasonable things. Cards to your families for Christmas and birthdays and all that. You pay at the shop prices. And these days, what's a stamp? I think the cheapest one's 80p. So that doesn't take much. I think the average pay for prisoners is only about £10 a week at the moment. Some earn more, but it's an average pay of what they can and cannot earn, depending on their status. You've got basic, standard, and enhanced prisoners. Standard come in automatically. You can go up and get more privileges, better pay. You can go down and get the minimum that you're entitled to within the prison rules and regulations. It's meant to incentivize prisoners for behaviour. It is what it is. Our education department did remedial, English, maths, cooking, art, and IT. And we weren't here for a long, long time, so it was more about motivating prisoners to get back into the education world where that was possible, ready for when they move on, if they move on at all. I went to Featherstone part-time when we closed. I was there a couple of days a week, that's all. But they've got a full-size engineering workshop, they've got a motor mechanic shop, and they've also got a modern printing shop. So all those skills at a practical level will always need good English and maths, as always. And these days, you're going to need to be pretty smart with IT, particularly the younger generation, folks. Quantum computing is coming your way, so mathematics is the thing to be doing, guys. Trust me. It'll be a world that you won't recognise in 20 years' time. But all those things. I've known prisoners achieve GCSE levels of a decent grade that they failed to get in school. I've known some prisoners achieve A levels while they've been in prison, and I've known some prisoners achieve degrees while they've been in prison as well. Eh? All things are possible, folks. Anybody going to do a degree here? Doing a degree? Not long done a degree? You're doing a degree, madam?
Finished.
Yeah, well, you're going to be paying for it relatively for quite a long time. I think you've got in your, if you've just not long done it, they put it from 30 up to 40 years you can pay it back now, which is a long, long time. Had you come and seen me before the degree, I would have said to you that armed robbery, if you don't point at anybody and don't put any bullets in it, it's about 10 years. Come into prison, do 5, do a degree, save yourself 70 to 100,000 pounds. And if you're really smart, keep the proceeds for crime. Eh? Up there thinking, dancing, folks. However, in university and prisons, you have to go back to your own bed at night, which we know is not true in university out there, guys. Eh? What's the point of university otherwise? Eh? Many other courses running for prisoners, folks. We've been involved in many of them myself. You've got things like anger management courses, domestic violence courses, you've got money management courses, debt management courses, you've got how to sit and write a CV, how to sit on an interview, you've got many other things. The big one in prison tends to be what they call COG skills, cognitive skills, based on the psychology. They're looking at what they call deficits of thinking. We all have deficits, ladies and gentlemen, we always do. The only difference is, as we go through our lives, we know how to manage them before it lets us step down a really dark place. We know when we need to start controlling that thing. They come in and they don't. So problems of immediate gratification. Take now lack of consequential thinking. The lack of an ability to see things from other people's point of view. I see what you say, I understand that, yeah, I got that, but I don't agree with you. It can be a struggle. So those kind of things can bring you into jail, and the consequences bump into them well after all those things have brought them into jail. So you can only do the best you can, folks. There's an old saying in society, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. People, all of us, will only change when we think it's the right time to do. And all I can do is motivate prisoners as best I can to take the opportunities that stand in front of them. And I said to prisoners, because it's no skin off my nose, folks, I'm pragmatic. The prisoners will sometimes achieve it and won't achieve it. I know where we stand with that. But I say, what have you got to lose? What have you got to lose? You're in prison. You might as well take the advantage of that, otherwise you're just going to be sat in that cell achieving nothing and probably getting angrier and more disillusioned with the world around you. Go and do something. Get what you can out of it while you can. And some do, and some don't. Some try, and some fail. Some try, and many can succeed. It is what it is. But if you don't offer it, folks, don't expect any changes. What's an old saying? The sign of madness is repeating the same mistake every time and expecting to get a different result. Doesn't work, does it? Come in this way. Pillories. These are pillories. Stocks you sit in, pillars you stand in. Never used in prisons. Always used outside when judges handed out sentences to be in the stocks and pillories. There's an old expression called being pulled from pillory to post. Some people still use it and know that expression. You know when you're going, what's that? What? Oh, I've got to be pulled from pillory to post here. But in actual fact, it's a sentence that was handed out by a judge. And it was always done out on the street. So this might be on an old horse and flatbed horse and cart. You'd be there and you'd be all in there. They'd be throwing all the rubbish and insulting you and slagging you off and you name it, really ugly. And then they'd take you off and tie you to a post and whip you. Then they put you on here and take you to the next place around town where you've been abused on the way around, abused a bit more, take you off and whip you. Being pulled on a horse and cart from pillory to post, pillory to post. So you imagine at the end of the day, folks, you're going to be in a pretty sorry state, aren't you? I started off in Jewel Gate, postal. This is the size of the landing stairs that used to be on there, all Victorians, okay? And I used to sit on those stairs because there was no offices on those landings. There was no radios, no telephones, no computers. All I had was a wooden baton and a whistle. That's all. So you'd be up there sometimes for hours at a time, and then you might have, every landing has what they call a cleaner or my cleaner. It might be one or two prisoners in that cell. But all the others are in and gone somewhere or locked up. You'll be there, and you need someone to sit down. And very often the old cleaner, I knew him for years, because every time he'd come back, you'd always pick the same cleaner, because you knew who he was and you trusted him. And he'd go, oh, hang on a sec, boss. And he'd get an old blanket, and he'd put it on there, and he'd go, there you go, that'll be a bit more comfortable for your ass. Oh, thank you very much. What a nice lad. A lovely lad, isn't he? And he'd go, do you want a brew, boss? I'd go, I'd love one. And he'd go all the way down the stairs to the tea-boy cell, get me a brew, and bring it back up. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want a foreign object in your mouth, you should be the only person to put it there, okay? Because you don't want a prisoner putting a foreign object in there. There's only so much protein you need in a day, and milk will do it, folks. So you do learn to trust prisoners. I'll tell you right up front, folks, everybody gets the impression on videos and dramas and stuff like that, it's an us and them scenario. It's not true. Not in my career, anyway. 95% of prisoners I've ever dealt with, I've always had some kind of working relationship with. Sometimes we'd hardly speak. Might speak to you once a week. Excuse me, what? Yeah, okay, sort that out. No, you can't have that, okay. And you might talk to me all the time. Have a good old chat about things. I've had prisoners discuss penal colony with me and just penal policies with me. They're not all dumb, you know. They might not be educated, but there are many intelligent prisoners that have got good, serious views about crime and punishment as well. And they'll talk about their own crime and punishment. It's really quite interesting. So it's yes, some are funny, some are jokey, some are happy to be here. That's never quite how we get that one. But it is what it is. It's only 5%, folks, that are really going to be a problem. But they do eat up all your resources, of course, because while I'm managing that difficult 5% of it, yeah, women with single cells there, they went out onto that yard to do the rub-a-dub-dub, and they do it for 10 to 12 hours a day. Now, the human body, they say, needs about 1,000 to 1,500 calories to survive without doing anything. They would be out there another 2,500, 3,000 calories. You can imagine the hard work it would take. So they're burning up to 4,000 calories. Do you think somebody give them 4,000 calories worth of food? Nice big piece of steak or really healthy food? No. They got a bit of soup, they get a bit of gruel, porridge, stuff like that. They might get a little bit of meat thrown in every third day. They were allowed things like every so often a pint of cocoa and a chunk of bread and water. So you can see, folks, they were getting ill. They were getting polio. They were losing weight. And they were going out of the prison probably with their immunity system broken down, not in a good state. But that's the way it was designed to be. You came to prison to be punished. That's why they brought in hard labour, that's why they brought in strict regimes, and that's why they give you crap food. They weren't going to pay for it, but they were going to make you suffer, folks. That's not the term. The term today is you come into prison as a punishment. It's been like that for 40, 50, 60 years. As a punishment, folks. As a punishment. The loss of freedom is meant to be the deterrent. Everybody's got a different value on freedom, depending on how old you are, what you're doing through, how you see freedom and stuff like that. So, but that's the way it's expressed today. After 1921, it became an all-male prison. They said men and women had to be different jails. This was mostly built, and it was used mostly for those prisoners that were on that protective custody that I spoke about, folks, okay, in here. We're going to move them all on eventually, so you need to create space for the next lot that's coming through. They work in a separate place, and education to a separate place, and they go to a gym at the separate time. It is what it is. It's not uncommon today to convert a whole prison somewhere to be what they call protective status. Anybody come from around Stafford here? Stafford Prison years ago was turned into what they call a protective status prison. All of them, about 800 odd prisons in there. Rolf Harris stepped out of those doors when he finished his time, folks. So it's easier to keep them all in one place, easier to manage them in one environment, stuff like that. Okay, we're going to go up to the execution room now. I'm going to finish the tour up there, folks. We've got plenty of time to read the stuff. And I'm going to tell you exactly how executions took place, right down to the fine detail. If you don't feel comfortable with that, folks, step out at any time. It's not compulsory. Well, except for the person I've chosen, but I'm not telling you tonight.
We are walking toward the execution room. And that's the last one. After that, our tour guide will give us chance to go around, check everything, facilities. Thank you.
Responsible in the early 80s for murdering a young lady the night before he got married, supposedly, and ended up cutting her head off and cutting her hands off outside of Sydney. There's a place called the Blue Mountains, and went up there to dispose of her body. It did get discovered eventually. They found him out in the woods, literally living like the wild man of Borneo. And they come in, he got a prison sentence, he got out of jail after doing, 16, 17 years for that murder. And then he ended up back on the wanted list again, because they think he was involved in another murder, because he was involved in drug dealing. And even today, this is 20 years on, he is still running around the bush somewhere where they can't find him. The most wanted prisoner in Australia. Yes. Never forget that man's name, and I'll never forget that man's face. Because he truly was a man that looked like you could see death in his eyes. This was a man that had absolutely no empathy feelings at all. And I've been in the service a long time. Even my boss in Australia said, when that man walked past me, he said there was a chill that came up my spine. And he'd been in the job a long time. So it's just that persona, quite scary. Come this way. Are you over for a period or just travelling around?
I'm travelling around.
Okay. Are you moving?
Execution.
Yes, yes.
I remember I came back.
1961 abolition. Execution abolished. I know that sentence. All these were executed.
All been knocked around, folks, so it's all slightly temporary. As you can see by this, it's got to go back up to the ceiling properly when we get round to doing it properly. So it's not easy because it's a listed building. You need ages for you to even put things back the way they were, let alone change them. Anyway, execution. Up until 1868, executions were done publicly. The idea behind public executions is bring everybody around and hang 4 or 5 at a time. This is what happens to you when you break the law. I remember up until the 1830s, there were well over 200 offences that carried the death sentence. We know of an 8-year-old girl that was executed or hanged for stealing loaves of bread. Poor people were looked down on. And this is the way you deal with poor people. And they did. Judges had the power of life and death over you all the time. Remember in the 1830s as well, that there was, 1822, there were 5 people hanged in Shrewsbury for burglary. So it makes you wonder, what were they sending them to the Australian colonies for? If it was burglary on the end of a piece of rope. Now when I worked in Sydney, I found out quite a lot about the sentences. If you got 7, 14, 21 or life, it was quite a common number. If they got 14, they wouldn't do 14 years in prison. They'd do about 3 or 4 years in prisons. And then they would be handed out to a master on the outskirts of Sydney when they were developing the whole country. They could get married, they could have children, they could live up there. And if they did well for 10 years, then you're free to go home now. So the reality is that they couldn't afford to. So most people stayed there in their own right as immigrants. It was only New South Wales and Tasmania that was used as what they call prison colonies. It's not the whole of Australia. There were immigration going on all around the place at the time, because everybody says, oh, it's a country full of criminals. It wasn't. Although it threw me out, what that means. So 1868, the government decided that it would be by mail only. That's all it was. And then they said, okay, then keep them occupied. Just preoccupied them for the last 2 to 3 weeks. Oh, and make sure they don't take their own life. And that's the real reason they were there, to make sure they don't take their own life. Because the state said, we'll hang you the neck until you're dead. Justice will be seen to be served. It's one of the reasons our courts have public galleries, so you can go and watch justice being served. That's how it is. So that was the way that was, okay? That was their job. The day before the execution, in the early 1900s, they brought executioners into the jail, and in the early 1900s, they made them stop overnight, ready for the next morning's job to be done. They've got things to be doing. There's a little bedroom around the corner you can see later on. They're going to be checking that the trapdoors are working properly, that the levers are working properly. They place two planks on the trapdoor because that's where the two prison officers under escort are going to stand with the prisoner. They get these ropes out of boxes. They choose one or two or three. It's up to them what they're going to use, and they get it all set up. They get the weight and the height of a prisoner. Up until the late 1800s, executions were done on a fixed drop. I think they called it a long drop sometimes. The trouble with that is big, heavy people, 15, 16, 17 stone, you might end up with decapitation. And if you're light, small, and petite, you could end up with a painful, slow death, basically strangling to death. They wanted to get it much more humane, so they said with better medical knowledge, let's change that from the cowboy noose to the loop. They changed that very quickly to brass because rope can snag on itself when you're trying to pull it quickly and tight. So they made that a brass ring, and basically they worked out a chart. And they said, okay, if the prisoner's 14 stone, we're going to come down to 2400 weight back across 4 foot. So that will be a 4 foot drop. And then executioners could adjust that 4 foot drop because they eyeball the prisoner unawares, looking at their necks, strong necks, weak necks, injured necks. They might adjust it by an inch or two. So they fine-tuned it by eyesight. That's how they did it. Set sandbags to the weight of the prisoner on there, to pre-tension the rope up during the night. Off they go to bed, woken up at 6:30 in the morning. They have breakfast and then they wait until 8 o'clock to start the execution. Except in London, they did them at 9 o'clock.
Rahul, what's your experience and how you are feeling in Shrewsbury since morning?
It looks more interesting, and we went to the single place now. Looks amazing.
And what do you think first time you in the prison, and how are your experience?
To be honest, it will be more interesting because we all didn't get a chance to go prison by luckily, but without crime we get a chance now. Let's see, and we will show you by our page.
Good. Let's see.